So we are very, very pleased to have Dr. John D. Wyndham with us. John Wyndham is a PhD physicist who was born in Australia but spent the last 32 years living in New Hampshire. He studied at the Cavendish Laboratory in Cambridge, United Kingdom, under two scientists who later won the Nobel Prize in Physics. That was in 1974. In his early career, he was a research fellow in radio astronomy at the California Institute of Technology. He was also assistant professor of mathematics, physics, and astronomy at Pepperdine University. He was formerly the coordinator of Scientists for 9/11 Truth, and his research papers on 9/11 can be found there and on his website, scientificmethod911.org. So John Wyndham will present an overview of the evidence of all forms and compare how different hypotheses explain or fail to explain the observations. His conclusion is that a large plane impact is the only hypothesis that it can explain all of the observations, and thus is the most plausible explanation of what happened at the Pentagon on 9/11. Please help me welcome John D. Wyndham.
My talk this afternoon is going to be on the various hypotheses that have been proposed to explain the damage at the Pentagon. And I'm going to show how these different hypotheses stack up against the evidence. And the conclusion I will reach is that the hypotheses that are alternative to large plane impact have problems, basically, in my view, insurmountable problems. I'd like to thank David Chandler and Fran Schur for organizing this conference. I'd like to thank the sponsors and the co-sponsors and the host organization, Colorado 9/11 Truth. And I'd like to thank the University Park United Methodist Church for providing this space for our conference. This is a brief summary of my educational professional background. Basically, I'm trained as a physicist and worked in that area for quite a number of years, wrote papers, spent the majority of my working career teaching and writing computer courses. But I came back to physics when I discovered the anomalies in 9/11. I joined the 9/11 Truth Alliance in 2007, Scientists for 9/11 Truth in 2009. I was a founding member. I set up a Scientific Method 9/11 website with other scientist members, John Cole, Timothy Howell, Jack Meager, and the purpose of the website is to discuss papers. And I've written 5 papers on the Pentagon and 2 on the World Trade Center demolitions. The links at the bottom show the additional information. Here's a list of my papers on the Pentagon. There are 5 of them, and they're starting from the top in time order. My first paper in 2011 dealt with the theories, alternative, or I call them theories then, but I see them all now as hypotheses. That's suggestions, not a theory. And they're all, so my talk is based on a table in that first paper. So what happened at the Pentagon on 9/11? Which hypothesis best fits the evidence? The best hypothesis is the one that explains all the physical observations, accords with eyewitness accounts, is consistent with other recorded data, such as the Pentagon video cameras, flight data recorder, radar data, is consistent with additional Pentagon evidence, and can meet all reasonable objections. And if a hypothesis fulfills the above, it then becomes a theory. So I'm going to compare the various hypotheses with the evidence using a table 1 from my 2011 paper, which I've updated with a couple of items of additional research that has happened recently. This is the summary table updated. The additions here are an item by Ken Jenkins about the clipped tree and the severed tree by Wayne Costy. So in my original paper, I had 6 items of evidence in the left column there under observation. So I had 8, now I have 10. And along the top there, under hypothesis, I have 6 hypotheses. So let's look at those in detail. The 6 different hypotheses I'm going to present or talk about. Number 1, large plane impact. Notable people who have supported large plane impact are Jim Hoffman, Victoria Ashley, Frank Legg, and many others. Second hypothesis, flyover and impossible maneuver. This is the theory or the hypothesis of Rob Balsamo of Pilots for 9/11 Truth. And they basically say the plane flew over the Pentagon and it was impossible for it to descend from the Virginia Department of Transportation antenna without this incredible G-force, which we now know is not a problem. The third hypothesis is one propounded by Craig Reinke and Aldo Marquis of the Citizen Investigation Team. They also say the plane flew over the Pentagon, but it flew on a different path. It flew north of the Citgo station. The fourth hypothesis, small plane impact. Number of people favor that, one of which is Massimo Mazzucco, who is notable for a very lengthy video on 9/11. 5, we have missile impact. I think Thierry Meyssan, who was the first to say there was something wrong with the Pentagon, he proposed missile impact in his second book. In his first book, he said it was a truck bomb. And lastly, we have bombs, explosives have been proposed by a number of people, including Barbara Honegger. I'm going to go on now and compare hypotheses with the evidence, 10 different items of evidence. The 10 different items of evidence are, the first is eyewitness evidence, and the items of evidence from 2 to 10 are all hard physical evidence. When I say hard physical evidence, I regard these items of evidence as indisputable. They are backed up by photographs from multiple people, sometimes from multiple angles, and plus witness testimony. So here's summary table number 1, updated. It's just the first half of the table. At the top there, you have the hypotheses, and on the left, you have the first 5 pieces of evidence under observations. If you look at the boxes there, if a hypothesis can explain the eyewitness testimony, we say yes. If it can't explain the evidence, we say no. Or we may say no to very little or no to very, very unlikely. So the ratings we have in those boxes are going to tell us whether those hypotheses agree with the evidence. So first of all, we'll start with eyewitness evidence. In the paper, at the top there, the link there, I've listed 64 eyewitnesses to plane impact. That was a paper written jointly with 6 other scientists and engineers investigating the Pentagon. As an example, Chadwick Brooks was a Pentagon police officer. He was at the Citgo station. He saw the plane nosedive into the Pentagon, full throttle, clip the lamp pole, and it just disintegrated the plane. A few years later, he, under additional questioning, he gave a different testimony, and if you want to follow the explanation of that testimony, as well as that of William Lagasse, there's a link there where you can see a 13-page exposition of their testimony. Darrell Donnelly saw the plane fly into the Pentagon. It just completely disappeared. And he was there, he had a camera. He saw the plane go in. He took some very well-known pictures now, including one of a secondary explosion some minutes after the plane hit. So, eyewitness testimony, here are a few more statements. Steve Anderson, he saw the jet slammed into the west wall. Deb Anlauf is an interesting witness. She was in the Sheraton Hotel, and that's about a mile and a half from the Pentagon. And as she looked out her window, she saw this huge airliner fly right by, and she watched it as it flew all the way and crashed into the wall of the Pentagon. Susan Bergen saw the jetliner skim the treetops and slam into the Pentagon. If you want to follow up on the eyewitnesses, there's an awful lot of resources for that. They're listed here, and you can do that at your leisure. You can see the witnesses who saw the event, the witnesses who saw the debris, the witnesses who described the plane, etc. So summing up the eyewitnesses, it was a clear sunny morning. Hundreds of people were stuck on the highway, Route 27, that runs a couple of hundred yards parallel to the west wall, and it's been described as a massive traffic jam. So you had an audience there of witnesses who could not have been staged there. They saw the huge fireball. The majority of the witnesses described the plane as large, silver, and low flying. So coming back to our summary table, look at the eyewitness testimony. The large plane impact can explain the evidence of a large plane. The large plane impact hypothesis can explain the eyewitness testimony, whereas none of the other hypotheses can explain it. But for the small plane, we've said no to very little. There are a few people who saw a small plane. Some of those were at a great distance where they probably couldn't judge the size of the plane, but by and large, most people saw a large plane. And so let's move on to the next item of evidence or observation, the airplane debris. The airplane debris was mostly fragmented, but there were a number of large pieces spread around. The debris was concentrated close to the facade north of the entrance hole, where the plane's momentum, the plane hit obliquely, the momentum and the trailing air mass, and possibly the explosion would spread it around. But the concentration north of the entrance hole is quite understandable from the momentum and the direction of the plane and the trailing air mass. There was other debris inside the building and in the A&E driveway, and the recognizable parts were silver fuselage pieces, engine parts, wheel hub, tire, etc. Some of the fuselage pieces had red and blue American Airlines markings. The debris basically matches that expected from an American Airlines Boeing 757-200. Here's a picture of the wheel wreckage found in the A&E driveway on the left. It's an exact match for a Boeing 757-200 main landing gear, which, as Wayne Costy pointed out, was stowed in the fuselage, so there's nothing odd about the fact that that piece came out through the C-ring hole. And here's a picture of the C-ring hole on the right. There's the debris spread out at an angle of 52 degrees with the walls, same angle roughly as the plane entered at the E-ring wall. And in the oval there, you see a tire and the wheel hub that has been identified. That wheel hub is peculiar to a 757. I don't believe there are other planes that have that particular wheel hub. Here's a landing strut found inside the Pentagon near the C-ring hole. This gentleman's carrying some silver fuselage pieces, and so is this individual here, and you can see the red American Airlines markings on those pieces of fuselage. So getting back to our summary table, look at the airplane debris. The large plane impact theory hypothesis can explain the airplane debris. Neither of the flyover hypotheses can explain that. Small plane impact can't really explain it because the parts match that of a large plane like a Boeing 757. Missile impact cannot explain the airplane debris, and neither can bombs or explosives. So moving on to the overall damage path, here's a graphic showing the 5 rings of the Pentagon. The E ring is the outer wall where you see a plane about to impact, and the innermost ring is the A ring, and the C ring is somewhere in the middle there. Underneath the left wing of the plane is the low concrete wall, and underneath the right wing is the generator trailer. We'll talk more about that. This diagram is from Russell Pickering. It shows the plane and the position of objects just as the plane is about to hit the west wall. You can see the right engine of the plane is about to impact the fence around the generator trailer, and the generator trailer is shown in its position after it's been rotated by the blow. The left engine is about to impact the low concrete wall, and the distance between the generator blow and the low concrete wall is about 43 feet, which is a good match, almost exact match for the separation of the 2 engines of the Boeing 757-200, which is 42.5 feet. The overall damage path is shown here. You've seen this before. Starting at the lower left, you have the clipped tree, downed light poles in yellow. The generator trailer is close to the wall, the low concrete wall. There's a severed tree right at the wall near column 16. And the red dots are the severely damaged columns. And the path ends in the A&E driveway at the tip of that arrow there where the C-ring hole is located. So coming back to our summary table, we look at the overall damage path. Large plane impact can explain that. No other theory can explain that. That all of those objects and all of those impacts. So anyway, so we have no for every other hypothesis, but yes for a large plane impact. Moving along to the clipped tree. This is the clipped tree, and as has been stated before, the right wing of the plane going at 560 miles an hour could easily clip that tree which could even be clipped by a dull tractor mower going at 100 miles an hour. That's from John Cole, Private Communication. So coming back to our table, the clipped tree can be explained by the large plane impact. Flyover theories can't explain that, but the clipped tree could have been clipped by a small plane. So I have yes in that box there. And a missile, if it had been right on target of that tree, could have clipped that tree. There's no way I can imagine that bombs would clip that tree, or why anybody would think of putting bombs there. So moving along now to the downed light poles. Here is a list of 15 witnesses who saw the light poles being struck by a large plane. And one of them, Tom Hovis, also says that it picked off trees and light poles, so we can presume that he saw the plane clip that tree. Looking at the down light poles again, The normal pole is in blue, the yellow is a clipped pole, and the separation of the poles gives us a wingspan of the plane in the range 100 to 130 feet. And so that's in conformity with the 125-foot wingspan of a Boeing 757-200. Here is again Lloyd England's taxi cab. The pole piece that went through the windshield is at the lower left in the oval. The large curved pole at the right is pole number 1, and that was lying there when his taxi arrived there. Look at the curvature in pole number 1 there at the lower right, and you look at the curvature in the other poles. There's no way that could be affected except by impact with a blunt force instrument, such as the spar of a plane. So coming back to our summary table, down light poles. The large plane impact can explain the down light poles, but none of the other theories can explain the down light poles. So we say no for all of them. So I'm now moving on to the second half of the updated summary table, the concrete wall and generator trailer damage. And here are 4 people who saw the plane hit the generator trailer, and one of them, Frank Probst, saw the left engine hit the low concrete wall. But he makes a little error. He says the starboard engine hit the low concrete wall. What he means is the port engine. The way to remember the difference between port and starboard is port has 4 letters and so does left. So port and left are the words to remember there. It was the left engine that hit the low concrete wall. Here's the fence around the generator trailer and the gouged generator trailer in its pivoted position. There was also a gouge on top of the generator trailer, which was caused by the first flap canoe. The canoes are those objects on the wings that house the mechanism that operate the flaps. And the distance between the shattered front and the rear gouge matches the distance between the right engine of a 757 and the first flap canoe on a Boeing 757. Here is the low concrete wall gouge on the lower left, where the left engine basically touched within inches of the ground. Here again is another picture of it. Those warning lights right next to the gouge, some people have said, well, they should have been knocked over. But if you look at this situation from different perspectives and different photographs, you'll see that those warning lights were not in the path of the engine at all. So coming back to our summary table, concrete wall and generator trailer damage, the large plane impact hypothesis, yes, can explain that. None of the other theories can explain that those 2 incidents. It's very difficult to think how bombs would rotate a 40-ton or 20 to 30, 40-ton trailer and make a gouge like that, especially when you have the first flap canoe gouge on top. All the evidence points to a plane impact. Moving along to the severed tree. The tree was in front of almost in front of column 16. This is from Wayne Costy's chapter 5. And there is the stump in that yellow oval this is taken after the facade collapsed. What does the severed tree tell us? It tells us that the tree was impacted by a wing spar. You had a short stump, and then you had trunk and branches displaced 100 foot to the north and to the lawn. Plane impact is the only reasonable explanation for the severed tree. Coming back to our summary table, building for severed tree, large plane impact hypothesis can explain the severed tree. The other flyover theories can't. The small plane impact could have severed the tree. A missile impact is unlikely if it had been a bullseye hit, but then the missile would not have distributed the branches the way they were. So really a missile wouldn't do it either. And we say, well, possibly a bomb or explosive could have done that. Moving along to the next item of evidence, building facade damage. This diagram is from Jim Hoffman's website, and it shows the 96 to 100-foot hole in the first floor. There were only a couple of feet of the fuselage was above the first floor slab, so that 18-foot hole was not the hole where the plane went in at all. Basically, the plane went in the first floor and a little bit at the very bottom of the second floor. Building facade damage, there again, the 18-foot diameter hole, a 96-foot gash. Because of the angle of impact, there was 140 feet wide of impacted facade. A Boeing fuselage is about 13 feet in diameter. If you want to know more about the building facade damage, you could look at Jim Hoffman's website and Wayne Costy's video, Chapter 8. Coming back to our summary table, the building facade damage, the large plane hypothesis can explain that. The next two hypotheses can't explain it. A small impact, plane impact could explain maybe some of it, but the size of the damage and the other configuration of the damage it's unlikely that it would have been a small plane. Missile impact can't explain it, and I don't think bombs could explain the damage there when you look at it in detail. So finally, we come along to interior columns, damage and debris. And this is from the American Society of Civil Engineers, who produced a report called the Pentagon Building and Performance Report. And they show the damage done. At the top there, you have a row of red columns, which are basically the columns 9 through 18 that were basically destroyed. Columns that are less damaged are in blue, then green, and then columns in yellow had retained some functionality. If you look at the path, down at the bottom right there is the C-ring hole, and this diagram basically shows you the size and the extent of the damage. It's consistent with a large plane flying at that angle into the Pentagon West Wall. Columns were missing, bent, damaged. The forward motion is shown by the damage in the interior. The columns were bent to show the direction of debris flow, and fragmented plane pieces abraded the columns. So that column at the left there is an abraded column. It's all the concrete around it has been stripped off by a high-speed flow of plane fragments, and the bending shows the force, kinetic energy, momentum of the debris. Here again, you have more curved columns and some silver sheet metal hanging from the roof. This is a very interesting interior photograph of more curved columns, lots of debris under an intact ceiling. Bringing that amount of debris under an intact ceiling in a few seconds would be an impossible feat to stage that. So what does the internal column damage debris show? The fact that they were curved and abraded with shredded metal around them, massive amounts of debris below an intact ceiling. Took several days to remove the debris, so the debris was not caused by a cave-in of the floor above. So from a scientific point of view, I think it would be impossible to stage that damage and debris. It's explainable only by plane impact. So coming back to our table, interior columns, damage and debris, we say yes for the large plane impact hypothesis, no for everybody else, except for a small plane, we say no to unlikely because of the extent of the damage that was there. Finally, the C-ring hole. This is a photo of the C-ring hole shortly after the event, and you have the debris and the plane parts in the A&E driveway. So what created the C-ring hole? The plane impacted the west wall at a 52-degree angle, columns were broken, bent, and abraded. There was a high-speed flow of plane parts and light fragments. The debris retained enough focus and energy to break through a 2-brick-thick masonry wall and create this somewhat circular opening known as the C-ring hole. There's the hole. After some of the debris has been removed, they've added some markings on the left and the right. On the left, you see a circle with a V in it, and on the right, it says punch out. The features of the C-ring hole are, it's the only true exit hole for the plane debris. There was smoke that exited through 2 doorways. One was a single doorway, and another, I think, a roll-up doorway. But they were not exit holes. They were entrance and exit holes, and they were man-made. The markings added to the walls beside the C-ring hole. On the left, you have the international symbol for victim V. The line through the V indicates the victim's deceased. The circle around the V indicates the body has been removed. And the marking on the right, punch-out, appears to be a contractor term for a to-do list or a list, a punch-out list. So coming back to our summary table 1 updated, this is the whole table in one slide. So you have the 6 hypotheses in the first horizontal row there, and the 6 items of hard evidence plus eyewitness, 9 items of hard physical evidence, plus the eyewitness testimony in the left column. And if you look at the large plane impact hypothesis, it can explain everything. Look at the next column, flyover, impossible maneuver, can't explain any of that. Neither can the flyover north of Cisco explain any of it. Small plane impact can explain a little here and there, but there are some serious problems, for example, with the separation between the concrete wall and the generator trailer says, no, it's not a small plane, it's a large plane. Missile impact can't explain very much of any of this evidence, and neither can bombs and explosives explain it. Most of the damage would have to be done by some kind of force hitting, slicing through things. So from this table, at this point, the large plane impact hypothesis is clearly the best hypothesis. Let's look at other recorded data. We have the Pentagon video cameras. Ken Jenkins, David Chandler have shown you can actually see the plane with a blink comparator. The flight data quarter evidence decoded by Warren Stutt supports not only the plane impact, but it supports the plane as being flight AA-77. And the radar data also supports the identity of the plane as flight AA-77 as originating from Dulles Airport. Additional Pentagon evidence. In my 2011 paper, I had a second table in which I listed additional evidence, and I've updated that evidence for this talk. So I'm looking now at updated summary table 2. And I'm going to break this into 3 parts because it was a large table, and I want you to be able to see it. We have the Dulles video, FDR data, radar data, Norma Minetta's testimony, and cell phone calls. Those are the observations in the left column. In the second column, I asked the question, is this evidence or hypothesis applicable? If it is, I say yes. If it's not, I say no. And then in the third column, would proof support large plane impact? And you can see that where the evidence is applicable, it supports large plane impact, and the details are in the comments section. Going to the second part of this table, spiral path, VDOT antenna, camera pole, autopsy results, 5-frame video, event time. These, where applicable, these items of evidence, where applicable, support large plane impact. The VDOT antenna, we now heard from David Chandler that he can actually measure the wingspan using this evidence here. There's the missing rung again. So in the third part of the table, we have seismic signal, clipped car antenna, men picking up debris, C-130 flight. Again, where applicable, they all support large plane impact. None of these pieces of evidence go against large plane impact. I'll just bring your attention, before I close, to the object under the blue tarp. There was a lot of questioning about what was under this blue tarp these gentlemen are carrying. You can see at the lower right. And this is from a PowerPoint presentation by Ken Jenkins. The blue tarp mystery solved. There was nothing under the blue tarp because the blue tarp had nothing in it. It was a tent. And the tent was used for triage. There were, and plus other purposes. But there are a lot of these tents with white tops to keep things cool there. They were all set up all over the area there. There are lots of aerial photographs showing many of these tents. So they weren't carrying anything. It was very light. And so this is the point. We wondered about this. We said there was something, they were hiding something, but they weren't hiding anything. So we make mistakes, and when we do, it most helps our credibility to admit it. So there was nothing under that. So the best hypothesis of what happened at the Pentagon is demonstrably large plane impact, and most probably flight AA-77, a Boeing 757-200. It explains all the physical observations. It accords with eyewitness accounts. It's consistent with other recorded data. It's consistent with additional Pentagon evidence, and it can meet all reasonable objections. So the large plane impact hypothesis becomes a theory. At present, the only theory that's passed the test of the evidence. Thank you very much.